And hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Cable. Chapters is the television program that profiles local authors, publishers, and writers in your community. And I'm Eliot Parker. It's great to have you with us for another episode of Chapters. And if you've been joining us or if you've watched any previous programs of our show on Armstrong Cable, you know that we have spotlighted and featured a lot of various authors from our community, both in West Virginia, Southern Ohio, and Eastern Kentucky. Well, today we're going to take a shift away from writing, so to speak, and focus on the other aspect of writing and the other aspect of the book industry, and that is publishing. So if you're a writer who has a manuscript out there, or you're a writer who has a potential manuscript out there, this will be a very important show that you'll want to pay close attention to, because we're going to focus on what happens to your manuscript after you have finished it and you're ready to seek publication. And to help us talk about publishing and to help us talk about publishing books and all kinds of other manuscripts, we have a very distinguished guest with us today, John Patrick Grace from Publishers Place Incorporated here in Huntington. And Patrick Grace is a former correspondent for the Associated Press. He was a Pulitzer Prize nominee at the Greensboro News and Record newspaper. He earned his Ph.D. in Italian and Medieval Studies at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and also earned an M.S. in journalism from Columbia University. And he has been a book publisher and editor since relocating to Huntington back in 1997. So with that said, Patrick Grace, we welcome you to the program today.
Hey, Eliot, good to be here.
Talk to us a little bit first. I do want to touch on book publishing and sort of the state of book publishing today in a little while. But talk to us a little bit first about Publishers Place, what Publishers Place is, and how that company got started.
Well, there were 5 of us that wanted to share an office, and each of us was publishers at the time. One published a magazine, another published some kind of a small press, and various different people came together to create an office and share expenses. And we said, well, what do we name this? We said, well, we're all publishers, so I guess it's Publishers Place, and that's how that happened. It was created right over here at Schlotsky's Deli on 4th Avenue, and now our offices have always been on 4th Avenue, first at 945 in the old Huntington Arcade, and more recently, in the last 6 or 7 years, on the 2nd floor of the Center for Independent Living at 821 4th Avenue.
So when we talk about Publishers Place, and I know your company and your organization and your part of Publishers Place has a specific mission and a focus. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
We have a mission statement to encourage, promote, and elevate the quality of the publishing arts in West Virginia, where we're headquartered, and the surrounding states. So we call that the Mid-Atlantic, for citizens of all ages. So we publish even down to children's books.
All right, and when we talk about the Mid-Atlantic, I know people hear that term sometimes, and as you mentioned, that encompasses West Virginia. Where else does that cover?
Well, it doesn't really cover eastern Kentucky and southeastern Ohio, but we put those areas into our regional publishing domain, if you will. But we do take in southern Pennsylvania, all of Maryland, all of Virginia, and because I spend so much time in North Carolina, we throw in North Carolina, even though there's no border contiguous with West Virginia. And we have authors from all those places, except we don't have one yet from southern Pennsylvania.
All right, talk to us a little bit about how you got Publishers Place started, and did you find that there was a need for a company like Publishers Place in this area?
Well, there's a need anywhere. We basically started out as a 100% subsidy publisher. We've converted to more what we call a co-op publisher, where we share expenses of publishing with our authors. They do have to pay for the basic production expenses, but we contribute free warehousing, free shipping of their books to locations, and quite a bit of marketing help that they don't have to pay for.
So when we talk about writers getting involved in that process, do you find that you are inundated and overwhelmed at times with requests for people looking for publishing assistance? Or
Yeah, and sometimes we turn down 9 out of 9 in any given week because people are really not... They don't have book projects in our area, so we don't just publish anything. We do publish basically narrative nonfiction, which means mainly memoirs or autobiographies. And then we publish fiction that is based on real events, real stories, real people. We don't publish what I call made-up fiction, nothing wrong with that, but if it's just totally made up, it has no basis in any real story, it's outside of our domain.
And I think one of the things that people often think about and hear about with publishing is taking that first step, sort of making that first step, making that contact with that publisher. For some of our viewers who may be watching and maybe they're in the middle of a manuscript, in the middle of a project, or thinking about putting a project together, what is some advice you can give them?
Well, they can look at our website and see the kind of books we do, and I think some of our guidelines are domain guidelines are up on the website. They can call us at 304-697-3236. That's our office phone number, or email us at publishersplace@gmail.com and give us a query, tell us what they're working on, and we'll pretty much tell them, if not quite immediately, in very short order, whether or not their project fits within our guidelines. And if it doesn't, sometimes we help them find another publisher. We put a little effort into helping people when we can.
Okay, so when we talk about the publishing and that part of the process, and once you're contacted, let's say for the sake of our discussion here today that you decide to accept a manuscript, or someone sends you a manuscript, albeit memoir, albeit true-to-life fiction, and they decide that they want to choose you to be the publisher, and you say, okay, we're interested. Kind of walk us through what are the next step in the process, and what's the time frame from the time you accept to publish?
We do what we call a book development contract with their agreement, and that means editorial development all the way through to a typeset version of the book with a cover design and everything else. We haven't printed the book yet, so it's not printed. But that book development agreement can range anywhere from $1,200 to $1,800, depending on the size and complexity of their project. That does get them through to the point where they're ready to print books and publish books with us. And then, of course, there's a publishing agreement. And then it depends on the quantity that we want to publish. If it's 300 copies, the unit price is one level. If it's 1,000 copies, it goes down. The unit price will go down. And then we do a marketing plan with them. We try to help them get started in marketing the book, and we can get it on Amazon.com. We can get it into the bookstores, at least the local bookstores. We can't promise them immediately national distribution. That rarely happens, as a matter of fact. We are a regional publisher. So although we have had books that have sold really, in a sense, coast to coast, in the sense that here and there, a bookstore maybe in California or Texas or Georgia has picked up some of our books. But we've never had a book that really is in all the bookstores coast to coast. We've never gotten to that point.
And when we talk about that aspect, I know we could spend a whole program, you and I, talking about sort of the second step that you touched on a moment ago with publishing a book, which is the marketing. And one of the things a lot of our authors that we've interviewed on Chapters has told us is that quite often the author themselves, whoever has written the book, that despite the fact if they would use Publisher's Place or someone else, that the author themselves is oftentimes the best salesperson for the book.
Oh, absolutely. 90% of the workload, if you will, is going to be on the author's shoulders. And the authors are going to have to spend some of their own coin getting around and talking about their books. We will, to a certain degree, help them get on the radio. We will write news releases for them in the first instance. We will help them set up book signings. But really, I'd say about 90% of the work is on the authors. They have to get around, they have to get on the air and talk about the book, they have to be interviewed, they have to go to book signings and sit there long hours, as you know, and sometimes only 2 or 3 people will come up, but once in a while you have a very successful book signing. You've had some of those.
Yes, absolutely.
Where you sell 13 or 15 books or more.
Absolutely. And what would you tell a writer who says that maybe is thinking about writing, or they've got a manuscript ready and they think, oh my goodness, I don't know if I could promote myself in that manner, other than you have to sort of get over it, I guess.
There are people that are kind of shy, and some of them may be good writers, and they're kind of handicapped if they can't get out and promote the book. Some of the people who might not be as good on paper are much better actually promoting the book. So it doesn't always come together that great writer, great promoter.
Okay, interesting, very interesting. So, and we should point out, too, that as we're having our discussion here today on Chapters about book publishing with John Patrick Grace of Publisher's Place, we will be showing on the screen for our viewing audience some of the Publisher's Place titles, both recent Publisher's Place titles that have come out and also some other books that they house. So you can see those on the screen as we continue to talk. Patrick, I want to shift gears for just a moment to talk about the state of publishing today. And I think, anybody who has paid any attention at all to books and likes to read or likes to take stock of reading or pay attention to that kind of a thing notices and knows now that we have a Kindle revolution, we have a Nook revolution, and we have people downloading books on tablets, on iPhones, on Kindles, on any kind of portable device. And 5 or 10 years ago, we heard this was the wave of the future, that this was going to be the way people were going to write and read in the future, and that someday printed books would go away. What are your thoughts on that? Has that been overstated?
Oh, yeah, it's very much overstated. I think e-books are plateauing at about a little under 30% of the market. Maybe they'll go up a little more. I doubt that they'll ever get much above 35% of the market, at least not in the near future. And curiously enough, a lot of people we're finding that have a Kindle and download books, they also will go into the bookstore or on Amazon and buy the printed book anyway. The average book reader in this country, believe it or not, reads only about 5 or 6 books a year. Those are book readers. So if you're only reading 5 or 6 books a year, it's not a big deal to go out and spend $14 for the book. You spent $9 for the Kindle version, but now you have both. And in different locations, you may prefer to read one version or the other, go back and forth. And a lot of people that download books are also buying printed books, and that's kind of been encouraging.
One of the things, too, I think we've seen with publishing, and we'll talk about the publishing houses in just a second, but you mentioned bookstores, and I think one of the interesting factors about this discussion with publishing is, we have seen as a readership society and as a society, we've seen bookstores come and go. The chain bookstores like Borders, which was so successful for a long time, sort of overextended themselves from a business market perspective.
Didn't get in on the ebook readers like Barnes & Noble did.
Absolutely.
That's one of the things they didn't do.
So they sort of have folded, and there's been Barnes & Noble and Books A Million that have filled the vacuum, so to speak. And those folks that live in the Huntington area know that the Borders at the Huntington Mall was one of the anchor stores for a long time. But along those lines, we've seen a surge in independent bookstores. Here in the tri-state region,
they've come back, and I think they've helped fill the vacuum left by Borders withdrawing from the market. So independent bookstores are enjoying a resurgence today.
And I know for folks that are looking for a couple of independent bookstores that may be watching, we have a couple here in our community. One, of course, is Empire Books and News down at Pullman Square if you go down in that area. There's Taylor Books in Charleston if you've been that way, and there's also some independent bookstores in eastern and central Kentucky. But what is it that you think makes the independent bookstore unique as opposed to going into a chain bookstore, and how they've been able to survive?
Well, unless the chain bookstore does a very good job of training their staff, the independent bookstores are much better at knowing the books that they have available in the store and being able to talk about those books. And that makes a huge difference. If you go into a store and you pick up a book and you take it to a clerk and you have an idea what this is about, and the clerk says, no, I have no idea at all. I can't tell you a thing about that book. You're in another store and you take the book to a clerk, and the person says, oh yeah, a lot of our staff have read that, and you're going to like that because XYZ, and they're able to talk about the book. That makes a difference. It's what you call hand selling the book.
Interesting, very interesting. Also, let's talk a little bit too about publishing and how the publishing model is set up. And you've touched on how Publishers Place kind of operates, but when we look at publishing, we've got what we call the big houses. The Random House, the Houghton Mifflin, the Penguin, the concentrated book publishers that are in New York.
Actually, conglomerates, you may as well say, except for Houghton Mifflin is not really a conglomerate yet. But a lot of those old line publishers that we know and love, like Scribner and Knopf and Pantheon and Athenaeum, they really are just now imprints. They're not actual companies. Their name may be on the book, but it's not their company. The company is owned by one of the big conglomerates, which typically are HarperCollins, Random House is one, Simon & Schuster is another, and Time Warner is a fourth conglomerate, which means they own a lot of these formerly traditional and well-known and well-loved publishing companies whose imprints we know and love, and they're not their own company anymore. They're under one of the conglomerates.
So somebody might be watching and they might think, well, because this company has so many imprints, why is it I can't get them to pick up my book? Why is it that sometimes those big publishers, those New York centralized, East Coast centralized houses are so tough to crack for a beginning writer?
That's about the $64,000 question, Eliot. And they're perfectly capable of turning down quality books that they should accept and publish. They'll manage to turn down. And they're perfectly capable of signing mediocre books that they really shouldn't publish. And I don't think there's any one answer to that question. Having a great literary agent obviously helps because agents can get in the door in a way that an individual author often cannot. But let me just say that there's a whole range of mid-sized publishing companies out there in the country, not all of them anywhere near New York, but good companies, and they will deal with authors directly. And on their websites, you can get submission guidelines. And they also deal with agents, but they're perfectly available to deal with individual authors as long as you follow their guidelines. If they say send us a 2-page synopsis of the book and you send in half the book, you've already struck out. Whatever the guideline says, do that. It probably says no phone calls.
Right.
They may say email or send us the opening chapter or whatever it says. Follow their guidelines and do not assume that the guidelines of one company are going to be equal to the guidelines of another company.
And I'm glad you brought that point up. That's something I found out in looking and just looking around at the different publishers that are out there, both the big houses in New York and also the small and medium-sized publishers. Is no two publishing companies have the same submission requirements.
No, they're proud of their submission requirements, and they are going to respect authors immediately that follow those to the letter and do what it says on the website of the publishing company according to the submission guidelines.
Can you give us 4 or 5 of those small to medium-sized publishers that you think are quality, quote unquote, and maybe a writer that may be watching us or a potential writer that may be watching our program today should look at if they're thinking about getting a book published?
Now, first of all, we're talking then about traditional publishers, which means they will not require you to spend any money. A number of the university presses, of course, fit that category, like Sparrow Press at Ohio University. And WVU, I think they have an imprint called Vandalia Books. Those are 2 in our area. The Jesse Stewart Foundation over in Ashland, Kentucky is a traditional publisher. Saraband Books in Louisville. But they only publish about 10 books a year. John F. Blair in Winston-Salem is another one. There's a publisher in Boone, North Carolina called Parkway Books. These are small but quality publishers, but be careful because there may be 400 people trying to get published by any one individual publisher, and they may have just 10 slots a year for books, and some of those slots inevitably are going to be given to their existing authors. So there may only be half that number. You may be trying to get one of 5 slots available, for example, a publisher such as John Blair in Winston-Salem. They may publish 10 books a year, but only 5 new authors, and yet they may have 200 or 300 submissions. So that's what you're up against.
When we talk about publishing, too, you touched on it a moment ago. We have traditional publishing, we have subsidy or co-op publishing, and then we have self-publishing. Can you take us through? You've touched on it, I know, a little bit, but the differences and the distinctions.
The distinction is not easy because self-publishing in the public mind and in the mind of much of the industry, it takes in almost any publisher where they're going to ask you for any kind of money up front. Unfortunately, there are some very low-quality self-publishing operations, and they give the whole industry a bad name. We won't mention any names, but I think we know some of those people. And then there's some very high-quality publishers. We never admit to calling our group here in Huntington self-publishing because we put each author through a very rigorous editorial process, and you've been through that. You're one of our authors. And you know that you don't just give us a manuscript and we set it in type and throw it back at you. It's not that way at all. But it is that way with any number of other places around the country, and those truly ought to be called self-publishing. Self-publishing is also when you decide to go down to your local printer and print your own book and get your own set of ISBN numbers, and now you are a publisher, and you create a name for your publishing company, and there you are. You're one of the publishers. That is the real self-publishing, and very few people do that. It's not a good idea unless you have an idea for a whole line of books. If you're going to do that for one book, it's a terrible idea.
That's something that's always interested me about publishing is there are so many companies out there, and any of our viewers that are interested, you could just type in a Google search or a Yahoo search self-publishing companies, and you'll be inundated with hundreds. Nationwide
it's
of
a huge number
of self-publishing.
I just Googled Wisconsin publishers because we have a book that really is set in Wisconsin. We may be interested in finding a Wisconsin publisher for it instead of publishing it ourselves. We just don't have the reach into Wisconsin. And so I Googled Wisconsin publishers and found 125 publishers. And of those 125, I'm here to bet with you that at least 90 of the 125, if not more, are all subsidy publishers. So that higher percentage would be subsidy publishers as opposed to traditional publishers.
What would you suggest for a writer who maybe is trying to establish a literary career, or is trying to get their foot in the door as a writer? Go the self-publishing route first in order to get the experience and to understand what it's going to take to market, or do you think they should step over that and look for maybe a co-op publisher or try to go for a traditional publisher?
Well, if they come to us, they can do all three, because we help people if they engage us, hire us in effect to help develop a quality manuscript. We're perfectly happy to say, if you want us to shop it around or try to find you a literary agent, we can do that. You have to pay our time, but we can do that. If you want us to go right to publishing, we can do that too. If you want to try one avenue first and that doesn't work, you always know that you can publish the book with us and pay the production costs. So people can sleep well at night knowing that they're not going to put all this effort into the book and nothing is going to result. It may take a period of a year and a half or so. In the case of Carter Taylor Seton, her book Father's Troubles ended up being published by us. But we did try 6 major publishers. They gave it a lot of attention, but in the end they all turned the book down and we published the book. So all the work over 2 years that Carter Seton put into that book, and she's an excellent writer, was not at all wasted. The book went on to sell 3,000 copies and win a national award as finalist for Best Historical Fiction in the country in 2003. So Carter slept well at night all those months when she was trying to get her book published. She knew that she could get it out with us if it came to that.
Also, what is interesting too about your company, Publishers Place, and again, you'll see some of the books that you've published on your screen, is that you've had a lot of finalists for awards, and you've had a lot of award winners.
And you're one. Your book won, the finalist for the
Weatherford Award.
Weatherford Award of Best Appalachian Fiction, and we've got that seal on your cover denoting that. So yeah, and Dwight Harshbarger's book, Witness at Hawk's Nest, was not finalist, it was the winner for the West Virginia Library Association's Book of the Year in 2009. So yes, we've had award-winning books, books that any major publisher really would have been proud to publish, but the truth is they are so inundated that they miss a lot of good books.
So Patrick, as we finish up here in our final moments, anyone out there who would like to talk to you or talk to someone at Publishers Place about anything we've talked about here about the publishing process, if they have a manuscript they'd like you to take a look at, how can they get in contact with you?
They can call us at 304-697-3236 or email us at publishersplace@gmail.com.
All right. And it's been a fascinating discussion here today, Patrick, about publishing. And this is something we're going to focus on more on our chapters program, the publishing and editing side of things, because it is so important. But I appreciate you taking time to come down and talk with us today. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
And finally, if you have a question, comment, or suggestion about this chapter's program or any chapter's program you've seen here on Armstrong Cable, or for that matter, any other program you've seen on Armstrong Cable, we would like to hear from you. You can send us an email at lp4, that's the letter L, letter P, number 4, at zoominternet.net, and we appreciate all the questions, comments, and feedback that we get, not only for the chapters program here, but also all the programming that you're seeing on Armstrong Cable. Well, that's going to do it for us this time on this episode of Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to Armstrong Cable for news and views that impact you.